Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever wanted to be a better leader or socially more intelligent, then do we have the 5 Roles of the Master Herder show for you. Today I'll be talking with leadership and social intelligence expert Linda Kohanov, author of The Power of the Heart and the Tao of Equis, about a brilliant new read that blew me away, The 5 Roles of a Master Herder. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about horse-inspired insights to work with others and lead the way. That plus we'll talk about trail rides and Nakia, Merlin and tabula rasa, inner lions, Flint and Micah, George Washington and treading grain, who in the world are the Spice Girls, sniffing the green monster, and what in the world does YouTube and oxytocin, or bears and deer, have to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Linda. Are you ready to shine?
Yes, Michael. I'm so happy to be here with you.
I am so happy to have you here, and a mighty woohoo for joining us on the show. So before we dive right into things, where'd you grow up, and did you always have an interest in horses?
Yes, I always had an interest in horses and all animals, really. I grew up in Youngstown, Ohio, and it's outside of Cleveland. And my parents were afraid of horses, so getting a horse was out of the question. But I managed to steal rides on some horses that didn't belong to me now and then, and also ride some friends' horses. But it wasn't until I moved to Tucson, Arizona in the 1990s that I was finally able to delve into the world of horses in my own right and buy my first horse.
Very cool. So you grew up in kind of a steel mill town, and you talk about in the book how the steel mill didn't quite make it in the long run, understatement. And then you ended up working as if I understand it right, a program director for a radio station.
Yes, I worked for a number of radio stations, and I was program director for a radio station in Pensacola, Florida. And it was really quite an ordeal, not just working at the radio station, but I was also a music critic. So I was dealing with a lot of highly creative people who were very independent, who often had very large egos and were rewarded for all kinds of behavior that I guess a lot of people in the media get rewarded for. And so as a result, people were driving me crazy at times. And I actually ended up buying my first horse to get as far away from people as possible on a regular basis. I wanted to ride into the desert and feel renewed. And that started my whole adventure with horses.
And so you went for a scenic trail ride, if I understand right, winter of 1993 in Tucson. Then you bought a horse a weekend later. Now, maybe you can tell us about Nakia, if I'm pronouncing that even close to right, and what he taught you.
Well, Nakia was a thoroughbred ex-racehorse off the track. And she was really beautiful, but she was also very willful. She had an incredible amount of power and speed. And she taught me a lot by also not being cooperative and actually being rather scary, because she showed me that I didn't actually have any real power and balance, that a lot of my power and balance and my ability to influence others were related to the fact that I had positions of power. So when I was program director of the radio station, or I was head of several committees that organized music festivals, I was also a music critic. So all of those positions caused people to want to cooperate with me because of the position and also because of the value I may have to them. And so when I was working with my horse Nakia and subsequent horses, what they showed me was I actually had to have authentic power and influence in the moment. And it had to be the kind of power and influence where I also gained their trust, where they wanted to be with me, and where I gave them confidence into stepping into the unknown. And that had nothing to do with my degrees, my training. They didn't care if I was wearing $500 cowboy boots or fancy new clothes. It just had to be what they call now leadership presence, and also the ability to connect and gain the trust of others. And it had to be coming from within me. And I think a lot of times in our culture, we do see power and influence as related to our position or our degree or how much wealth we might have or influence we have in other areas. And with horses, none of that is causing them to cooperate.
So I've worked with horses, as I mentioned before the show. I've owned 3 horses myself. I've been thinking about it lately. I'm sure I will own horses again when the time is right. It is real easy if you watch, unfortunately, the bad behavior of other horse owners around you to say the answer is going to come from the whip. It's going to come from being stern. It's going to come from me yelling to be kind, yelling at horses. How did you listen to your intuitive side and start to cultivate your inner strength without turning in that direction?
Well, I was very resistant to using a lot of stern language or whipping the horse or hollering at the horse, even though that's what a lot of the trainers and horse owners around me were recommending that I did. But at the same time, kindness and sympathy and understanding weren't enough. They needed you to be balanced. They needed a balance of what we might call the masculine and the feminine, or the yin and the yang. And to find that balance was a journey that took me years to learn and culminated in the one who taught me the most about power, which was an abused Arabian stallion by the name of Midnight Merlin. Midnight Merlin would attack anyone who entered his corral. And if you tried to put a halter on him, he would act like you were shocking him with a cattle prod. He would attack you. He would try to bite you. He would rear over you. He would try to kick you. And something in me was ready for him because I had had experience with other horses before. But he was the one who truly taught me what I came to call non-predatory power and emotional heroism, as well as the physical heroism I needed to go in with him every day. And he's the one who I truly learned that in order to help him heal from the wounds and the abuse that he had had, and his tendency to go to fight rather than flight, which made him more dangerous than many horses, that I had to become powerful myself, but in a different way than we normally define power.
I look at it when you step into his arena, whatever that looks like, is you have to have a very stable foundation, or he's going to be scared. If you come in from a place of weakness, from a place of fear, that's going to off balance him. That's going to rock his world. But if you come in there solid on your 2 feet, confident in yourself, it gives him the ability to relax into you, so to speak.
Well, at the same time, I mean, it has to be authentic confidence and authentic, because one of the things that horses cannot stand is someone who's incongruent. So if you're feeling fear, but you try to act like you're not feeling fear, they can tell that that's going on, because unless you're a sociopath, and I don't know many sociopaths, thank God, unless you're a sociopath, your blood pressure and your heart rate and your body posture shifts when you're feeling fear or anger, even though you may be wearing a mask of calmness or confidence that might fool a human being. Horses are not fooled by the rise in blood pressure and tension in your body when you're feeling a strong emotion. And they actually calm down once you become congruent, once you acknowledge the emotion you're feeling.
Very cool.
So there were times where I had to go in and say, Merlin, this is scary for me, just so I could become congruent. But at the same time, then I had to step beyond that and move into a place where, I do care about you. I'm willing to face this fear and this uncertainty to work with you. And I have confidence that if you're willing to meet me halfway, together we can work this out.
Amazing. How did your congruence change your relationship to those around you over that time?
Well, as it turns out, after working with horses all these years, I'm a terrible liar. If I had any capacity to hide emotion or lie in the past, that's pretty much been washed out of me. So, I've learned though how to use my emotions and others' emotions as information without necessarily mentioning the emotions themselves, because a lot of people aren't comfortable talking about emotions, depending on the situation, especially in professional situations. And so by the time I wrote my 4th book, The Power of the Herd, a non-predatory approach to social intelligence, leadership, and innovation, I actually had ways of helping people decipher the emotions they were feeling and the emotions they were seeing in others, and helping them learn how to create authentic problem-solving conversations based on what those emotions were asking you to address or adjust to, rather than speaking the emotion itself out loud. And it turns out that when you're willing to address the issue that the emotion is bringing up, you are becoming congruent. You are paying attention to what's happening.
Beautiful. Can you take us from Merlin and tell us who is Tabula Rasa?
Tabula Rasa which means clean slate. She was a horse that came after my first horse, Nakia, who was really too much horse for me at the time. So I found a good home for Nakia. And I got this beautiful black Arabian mare named Tabula Rasa. And my goal was to start with a horse that hadn't been abused or engaged in dysfunctional relationships with human beings, and get a nice trainer and start from the ground up. And so we started this horse from the ground up with a trainer by the name of Vicky. And all along the way, she didn't have any abuse in her background, but she also demanded that I be present, that I be authentic, that I be confident, while also being able to negotiate with her. And so I learned a lot from working with her. And over time, because of all of our adventures, which I wrote about in my book, The Tao of Equis, and Riding Between the Worlds in particular, after those adventures, part of the adventure was that she took me to a place where I was experienced enough with horses that then when we came across the abused stallion, Midnight Merlin, that I was able to adopt Merlin and help them form a real relationship. And they have children. Both Merlin and Raza are now beyond this world. They've passed away, but I still have their children and their grandchild. And so I actually had to learn how to work with a fully empowered herd over time. And that created all kinds of new insights into social intelligence, and eventually this idea of the master herder and what herders of large animals that are free and empowered have to learn to deal with, and how that relates to how we can work with free, empowered people.
Very, very cool. Maybe you can take us from there and tell us about the birth of Indigo Moon.
Indigo Moon was born. This was a hard one for me because my horse Tabula Rasa and her mate Merlin, she was pregnant with Indigo Moon, and Indigo Moon was born in such a way that he was coming out of the birth canal before the water had broken. And so I actually had to break the water and help Indigo Moon out of the womb. And so there are all kinds of situations I found myself in that involved all kinds of knowledge and bravery, because I'm actually very squeamish about anything that's medically oriented. So to be the one who was there alone when I had to help Indigo be born was really quite an ordeal. The interesting thing about Indigo Moon is I was in a position of really being the first being of any kind that he saw. And so I was kind of his, I guess, Aunt Linda. And so he saw me very much as another being that was a family member rather than as a human that he should be afraid of. And so you would think I helped him be born, I helped him along the way, that he would be more gentle. But as it turns out, he was a whole lot like Merlin. His father, Merlin, was a naturally dominant horse and highly sensitive and very intelligent. And that particular combination creates a being who's in constant power plays with everyone around them. And because Indigo Moon was not the least bit afraid of me or any other human, he actually became scarier for a while than Merlin was. And so I learned that a lot of times, people want the best for their children. And, you can be a really gentle, nurturing person and have a child that's naturally dominant and highly sensitive. And in order to help that person grow up and to learn how to use their power in an intelligent, effective, compassionate way, all of a sudden that nurturing parent has to be empowered. And to the point where I actually have seen enough of this kind of behavior in humans where I believe that jails have a significant number of people in them who are of this same type, naturally dominant, very powerful, very sensitive, and yet they had very kind parents who couldn't begin to help them learn how to use their power appropriately. And so this is where I began to see that all of us need to understand the dynamics of power and how to use it effectively to help future generations learn how to be productive members of a society that values individual as well as group needs.
Thank you. It takes me back to when I had my horses, and we had foaled. One of our horses came out with a congenital condition that was supposed to take care of itself, where it had kind of knock-kneed. And the vet at the time said that the first year of its life, well, he was named Baby, Baby needed to be kept in a pen. And Baby was foaled from a thoroughbred, and a very strong one at that. And because I was the one who fed Baby and cared for Baby, I was Baby's family, and Baby both didn't see me as, he saw me as another horse, and also, just like you're saying, I was not fully congruent yet. I hadn't grown into myself. And I can remember the first and only time where I turned around to grab a flake, and he reared up and threw me to the ground. And so I had to work through those learnings. I didn't have your books. I wish I had.
Well, I had many instances like that too, where I didn't have the books either. I actually did the research and the writing as a way of saying, geez, I really need to understand this. So if it happens again, I have some tools to work with, and I would like to share those tools with other people. So yes, I know exactly what that feels like. I have been thrown to the ground. I've been run over, all kinds of things. And this is why horses are also such great teachers of mindfulness in action. When you're around these animals, they are themselves some of the most mindful animals you'll ever meet. But they also demand that you be mindful of yourself, your body posture, your breathing, what you're conveying, your blood pressure, and mindful of all of those elements going on in the horse that you're interacting with. And then once you're interacting with an entire herd, you have to pay attention to that in yourself and all of the horses around you and their relationships with each other, because they can get into fights with each other if you're standing there, and you better know that it's about to happen, or you can be kicked and caught in the middle of it, and you're the one who's going to lose.
Thank you. I want to talk with you briefly about herds. I was once more than that, 7 years ago on book tour out by Mount Hood, on the backside of Mount Hood, and there was a wild herd. And I'm hiking up behind this wild herd and go well up into the hills, and we're leaving them alone, they're leaving us alone, when all of a sudden, Stallion turns along with his mare, struts back towards us, rears up, whinnies, and quite literally draws a line in the sand. And I have never seen such a thing before or after. He had all of his other horses behind him, and he's like, look, dude, you take another step forward, and that's it for you. It was such a fascinating experience, which completely blew my mind on the whole theory of predator, prey. All of that junk was kind of out the window at that moment. And you had a similar experience. Maybe you can tell us about Raza and Nala and what happened when a herd of cattle appeared.
Yes. And, I have to say, Michael, that's a really amazingly it's an amazing anecdote about the intelligence and the social intelligence of horses, because that stallion walked up. He didn't chase you down and attack you and kill you. He gave you a warning first. And that's how smart they are. And horses, if you're paying attention, they will give you 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 warnings a lot of times. And many times people just aren't listening, or they're too arrogant to negotiate with a horse. And sooner or later, someone who weighs 1,000 pounds is likely to win. But that was really great this shows the intelligence of the horse. He's trying to show you need to back off. He's giving you a warning, and he's giving you a chance to back off. And, a lot of people we know aren't smart enough to do that. So they go from 0 to, 100 degrees of aggression. And the horses have this ability to gradually increase the power and and pressure, and then give you immediate positive feedback when you listen to them, which is what that stallion did, right? Once you backed off, he just turned and walked away. He didn't chase you down and try to kill you. So that's a great example of non-predatory power in action.
Thank you so much. And then what happened with Raza and the herd of cattle?
Well, I was out walking with Raza, and she and I would go for walks in the desert. And I had a halter on her, and then I would take the lead rope off. And I also had my young dog Nala with me. And Nala was a mixed breed. She looked like she was part German Shepherd and part Golden Retriever. And she was also very dominant and very protective. And she had this interest in chase. She just thought all horses were begging to be chased. And so I thought, well, I could see that Raza had this way of, first of all, Raza enjoyed chasing coyotes out of her pen. So Raza wasn't, a scared horse. She was a very confident horse. And yet she showed restraint. So similar to that stallion you were talking about, if Nala came up and was trying to chase Raza or any of her children, Raza would lunge at the dog and let the dog move. If the dog moved back, then Raza would just turn and go back to what she was doing. I call that back to grazing. Or if the dog came toward her and tried to chase her from behind, she might trot up a little bit, and then she would stop and she would shake her leg at the dog to warn the dog to back off. And if the dog backed off, she didn't bother to haul off and kick the dog. And so I thought Raza would be a great trainer of Nala to help her learn how to have respect for horses. So I took Raza and Nala out with me one day in the desert, well, a number of days. And Nala was running loose and Raza was loose. And we came to a mesquite grove, a grove of these trees in the desert, and we heard these crackling twigs and saw the trees kind of moving. And out of this grove of mesquite trees came a herd of cattle. And these cattle had their horns on. They were cows, but cows protecting their young with horns can be really quite dramatically dangerous if you're not paying attention. And they're out there with mountain lions and coyotes, so they do know how to protect themselves. So this one cow was the head of this group of cows, and she came toward us with these big long horns. And I was kind of wondering what I should do. Should I back off quietly, or should I move toward her and try to herd her and her cohorts away? But all I had in my hand was a lead rope. And I figured that Nala would chase them off because she was always chasing everybody. But Nala saw these cattle coming, and Nala turned tail and ran to me and huddled against my legs and looked up at me like, what do we do now?
And this is an 80-pound dog. This is not a small dog.
Yes. No. And she really was chasing everything under the sun. So this was shocking to me. And then I figured that Raza would have turned tail herself and headed home. And instead, what Raza did was that she ran in front of Nala and me, and she ran toward these cattle and did something very similar to the stallion you were talking about. She ran toward them up to a certain point and just kind of ran in a kind of arc back and forth and shook her head at them and pinned her ears at them and basically said, back off. And the cattle did. They backed off and they walked away. And then Raza just turned around and started walking down the trail with Nala and me. So this idea of prey animals being quivering, gutless victims and predators always being the ones to attack was absolutely turned upside down for me that day. The aggressive dog, was the one who was shaking in her fur, not in her boots. She didn't wear boots, but and the horse, and Raza was somewhat lame at the time, and Raza was the one who protected the two quote-unquote predators who were with her. So this is when I started to realize that it wasn't quite accurate to call horses prey animals. They are large herbivores, they're vegetarians, but they're fully capable of protecting themselves, and they will actually perform altruistic acts to protect other herd members. And in my case, Nala and me were her herd members, so she was willing to protect us.
Very, very cool. Thank you for sharing. For years, I used to run along the Colorado prairie, and early mornings, they would have all these encounters with coyote and other wildlife. I can remember the first time I saw a coyote hanging out with prairie dogs. just minding its own business, and the prairie dogs are only a couple feet away. All it would take is one turn, and the prairie dog is gone. But instead, they were hanging out together. Maybe you can share what is mutual aid, because this whole idea of survival of the fittest, we may have this quite wrong, and it affects our interpersonal relations.
Yes, I think that because we've grown up in a culture of conquest, we are all part of numerous cultures that were conquered by some rather aggressive members of our species. And so humans in our culture tend to over-identify as predators. We're actually omnivores. We have the teeth more of a vegetarian, but our eyes do look forward like predators do. But this gives us Jekyll and Hyde moments where, instead of recognizing ourselves as having access to both the predator and the non-predatory forms of power, some people over-identify with the predator. But as a result of this, when Darwin's theory of evolution came out, a lot of people used that theory to justify intensely predatory behavior as laws of nature. So the more aggressive kings and rulers and businesses would say, yes, Darwin's theory of evolution says it's survival of the fittest, competition for limited resources. It's a dog-eat-dog world out there. And our job in alignment with nature is to subdue other species and other humans. And as the fittest, then we will rule. But as it turned out, that wasn't necessarily what was Darwin was saying. And it became even more clear with the work of Peter Kropotkin. Peter Kropotkin lived around Darwin's time, and he became very excited about Darwin's theory. And he decided he was going to go out and help prove Darwin's theory. Kropotkin was a Russian prince before the Russian Revolution, and he had a lot of time and money on his hands, and he was also very intelligent and well-educated. So he commandeered a group of 10 Cossacks and 50 horses, and they headed out across Siberia, and they were observing nature and taking notes on nature. And Kropotkin came back and said, this current way that Darwin's theory is being interpreted, over-interpreted as survival of the fittest, meaning survival of the most aggressive and most fierce, is not accurate. That actually mutual aid is a significant factor in relationships between members of the same species and even relationships between species. And so he wrote a book called Mutual Aid, A Factor of Evolution. That book came out around 1902, and it was promptly ignored by most of the people who wanted to justify their overly predatory behavior using Darwin's theories. But as it turns out, that Kropotkin showed that sociability and mutual aid are significant factors in the success of multiple species. And so when you see coyotes and prairie dogs hanging out together, or in the desert, it's actually pretty well established that coyotes and badgers will hunt ground squirrels together. So they'll engage in cooperative efforts. The human-animal bond itself is an example of mutual aid between species, so that when humans formed partnerships with horses and dogs and cats and other animals, there was, in the beginning, a significant benefit for both species. And so there's significant biochemical research now that shows that a hormone called oxytocin is actually released in both men and women, though for a long time they thought it was only released in women during childbirth and milk production, or mammals at least. But as it turns out, that this hormone oxytocin buffers the flight or fight response in favor of a calm and connect response. And it encourages people and other animals to be more trusting of others, not just other people outside their tribe, but other species. And so there's a book called, what's it called? It's by Meg Daly Olmert, Olmert, and she really talks about the biology of the human-animal bond as being related to the release of oxytocin. And you can really see that nature has a heart. and that nature is asking us to reach out to each other, not just prey on each other.
Thank you. And if we kind of fast forward, and I want to go into your 5 types in a minute here, we've exited a time of dominance, and we are now entering a time of nurturing, a time of bringing more oxytocin to the forefront.
Yes. Well, I think it's been going on for thousands and thousands of years because when humans formed partnerships with animals 30 to 50,000 years ago, it's very clear that it was based on mutual aid and mutual advantages between the species, and that when you engage in nurturing relationships, even across species lines, oxytocin is released. But in our culture, we've become somewhat more aggressive as we separated ourselves from nature. And also, a lot of people have separated themselves from animals and other people in cities. You can walk down a city street and see people, texting others electronically and ignoring everyone around them. And that people are becoming more aggressive as we isolate ourselves from nature and find ways to isolate ourselves from direct connection with other people. And so I'm not really sure if we're coming out of the age of dominance into an age of nurturing, but the two have been active all along. And without the nurturing arts and the release of oxytocin that shifts you from a flight or fight mode into a trusting, confident, socially intelligent mode, I think that humans are becoming actually more dangerous and more aggressive. And we've been seeing that recently.
So would you say then we need to get back to nature, or back to animals, or back out of the electronic cyber world to some extent? I mean, that's how I make my career, is here, but then I throw myself outside. I was looking at, as the pond was melting, all the birds turning the center of the pond into a bird bath, and they were taking turn. They were coming 5 or 10 at a time, wash themselves, get the job done. They'd fly off. The next crew would come in, and they're working together. We need to get back to that, to bring more of that nurturing aspect into our lives.
Yes, we need a balance of both. I'm not saying we should get rid of technology. Technology is a wonderful thing. But we also need to balance that with actual one-on-one or multi-group human relationships, that where we move beyond being competitive and actually learn how to support each other, and engage in socially intelligent, emotionally intelligent relationships. So we don't really have to get rid of one in favor of the other. Mm-hmm. We can bring animals into our homes. We can spend time going out to places where there are animals like horses. And that's a great deal of what I do, is I bring people who are in significant leadership positions, entrepreneurs, political leaders, people who are leaders of religious communities, parents, teachers. They come out and they learn socially intelligent leadership skills and socially intelligent ways of engaging in mutual support through working with horses. And they actually have done some studies to show that simply spending 10 minutes petting an animal will release oxytocin in you as well as in the animal. And that shifts you into a less aggressive, more open-hearted, yet still confident demeanor. And so we can bring animals into our lives in different ways. But it also means that we need to protect nature so that we have nature to go back to when we need it.
I'm thinking now of kitties and puppies. You need at least one in every boardroom. So
yes.
Let's talk about the 5 roles here, and I want to talk about dominance without malice. Let's talk about dominance for a minute here.
Yes, and let me give a little bit of background just on how I sort of came across this idea of the 5 roles of a master herder. When I was writing my 4th book, The Power of the Herd, I decided I was going to research leadership and power throughout history and in multiple cultures. And what I found was that nomadic pastoralists, which are tribes that move with large animals like horses and cattle, goats, sheep, camels, sometimes a combination of all of them, these nomadic pastoralists have an amazing level of socially intelligent leadership that we've lost in our sedentary hierarchical culture.
Mm-hmm.
We've fenced our animals in, we've restrained them, and we've found ways to fence people in and restrain them in various ways. But the nomadic pastoralists, they actually move across vast distances with no fences and very little reliance on restraints. And they keep the herd and the tribe together, and they influence each other, and they mutually empower each other, but in such a way that it's a compassionate, socially engaged form of power. And in order to do this, the master herder emerges. And I use this term not in terms of like a master-slave relationship, but in terms of self-mastery of your own power, and also the mastery of 5 different roles, 5 different forms of power and influence that a master herder needs in order to move with these large animals and keep them together. And so this becomes an amazing metaphor for what we're being challenged today to do, because in some sense, a lot of the old fences are falling down in the human world through the internet, through increased travel, through the idea that you can, raise money at home and have supplies delivered to the door and start a business in a basement. Steve Jobs is famous for that. Anybody can do that now. And so that gives people a lot of freedom and autonomy and makes them much less apt to put up with the old dominance, submission, intimidation forms of control that the old system had in mind. And, some people are still engaged in that kind of power, but it's less effective these days. And so I found that we didn't have to reinvent the wheel as we head toward more freedom in the human world and more autonomy and greater options. Instead, all we have to do is go back and look at these master herders in traditional pastoral cultures and learn how to develop 5 roles of power and influence to become fully empowered leaders ourselves. So a master herder is more than a leader, which is why I didn't call it a masterful leader. A master herder is someone who is a leader and is strong and compassionate, but also is a caretaker and a guardian and fully empowered and capable of protecting themselves and others. And so it's a really well-balanced form of leadership that's very mindful and enlightened. And so the 5 roles of a master herder are the leader, the dominant, the nurturer companion, the sentinel, and the predator. And as omnivores, humans need to know when and how to use the power of the predator, but we also need to know how to separate predatory power from the leader, dominant, nurturer, companion, and sentinel roles. And most people are naturally good at 1 or 2 of these roles, and they tend to overemphasize those roles. And each role has a shadow side to it, a dysfunctional side when that role is overemphasized. And so a lot of dysfunction in human groups happens when you have one person overemphasizing the nurturer companion and another overemphasizing the sentinel and another one overemphasizing the dominant and somebody else combining the leader with the dominant or the leader with the predator. We need to learn when and how to use all 5 roles in a mature way for their greatest effectiveness.
So is that a matter? Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Is that a matter of being more mindful, more present of who we are in each moment and what direction we're leaning toward?
Well, it's actually a matter of recognizing that, if you overemphasize or over-identify with yourself as a leader or a dominant or a nurturer, that you're doing yourself and everyone around you a disservice. That you have to stop over-identifying with a particular role and recognize that you have the capacity to learn to use all 5 roles and not identify with any single one of them, but learn when and how to use each one for its greatest effectiveness.
Thank you. Let's talk about each of the 5 roles very, very briefly. Let's start with the leader.
One of the things that we mix up among humans, especially humans who've lived now in these city-based cultures away from nature, is that people mix up the leader role and the dominant role all the time. But nomadic pastoralists know that in herds of horses and cattle, the leader animal and the dominant animal are often 2 different animals, even when humans aren't present. And they've learned from the animals themselves when to use the leader role and when to use the dominant role and the other roles. The leader horse in a herd is very hard to identify among domesticated horses, because the leader is the one who is most effective and stands out the most in novel situations. When something new comes into the environment, other horses look to the leader to see if the leader's nervous about this or if the leader's confident or curious. And so as a leader, when you're using the leader role, you're the one who's looking at whatever's new happening in the environment and investigating it with an appropriate level of confidence, and then also drawing others with you and inspiring them to come with you. The leader has a kind of inspiring, drawing energy, and they often cause others to feel calm and focused in situations that will unnerve almost anyone else. So the leader tends to be confident and tends to conserve energy for true emergencies. And they also are the visionaries of the group. The dominant, on the other hand, is an animal that uses a driving or pushing energy and also a divisive energy. So the dominant role in a herd, or dominant animal in a herd, is the one who will break up fights between animals. They're using that divisive energy to break up a fight. They're also using the driving energy to herd everybody away from something that's dangerous. When the stallion went up to you and drew that line in the sand and said, you're not crossing here, or you're about to face a horror you can't really quite imagine at this moment, that's the use of the dominant role, drawing a line in the sand, setting boundaries. The dominant animal will drive off predators. And, in herds of horses, a lot of times you'll get several dominant animals that are themselves, they're just filled with an additional level of energy and a kind of natural bravery, not in novel situations, but the bravery to drive off something that appears to be a danger and the bravery to herd everyone away from the danger. The problem with the dominant role is because of that level of intense energy that can push others around, it can be easily misused. And so among humans who are naturally dominant, they often are overly aggressive, overly intimidating. Dominant people will do the same kinds of instinctual things that dominant horses and dominant dogs will do. They will see something new and they'll go after it and chase it away, and then they'll herd everyone away from the new thing. And then a lot of times the leader then will come out and assess the situation and maybe see the value and start to walk toward it, and then inspire everybody else to walk toward the new thing. So a lot of times the dominant animal is the one who's skeptical of something new and likes to emphasize the status quo. The leader is the one who will go toward the new thing, find the value in it, and then inspire and draw everyone toward the new thing.
Very, very cool. Maybe you can tell us real briefly, and then we'll go into the other three roles for a short touch. But the 4 power principles for working with dominance.
I mean, one of the main problems with somebody who's dominant, who's naturally dominant, some people are really gifted at this, horses and people, is that if the dominant is overemphasizing that role and also using that role in an immature form, and by immature dominant, you can be 75 years old and be an immature dominant because you're not using it in its mature, thoughtful, mindful form. So dominant animals that are immature will do something that everybody else finds absolutely confounding. They'll assert power by keeping everybody a little bit on edge. And so to do this, a dominant horse will attack different horses throughout the day for almost no reason at all. Couple of horses are dozing in the shade, and a dominant animal will run into the middle of it and push everybody out of the shade and then stand in the shade on his own. Or the dominant animal will chase other animals off their food when he has plenty of food of his own. It's just they're constantly engaging in power plays. So one of the first things you need to know is to not take dominance games personally, and to recognize that among dominant animals and people, the power plays are endless. and they are likely to engage in this inexplicable attacking. So, and it doesn't seem to have any rhyme or reason to it, and yet people will take it personally. So the first thing you need to know is to not take these dominance games personally. You also need to pay attention to body posture and breathing when you're interacting with dominance. A lot of times people will try to use logic or reason with them or whatever. And if you have a kind of, because they're so intimidating and their body posture is designed to intimidate, if you're collapsing and starting to yield to them, that causes them to take more advantage. So if you yield to a dominant, they actually take more liberties with you. And so you have to learn how to create a body posture that will hold your own and be centered and do deep breathing and engage with the dominant to show them that you can hold your ground without collapsing and yielding, but also without fighting back, because they're masters at fighting back. You don't want to fight back. So one of the things we do in the equine facilitated learning programs that I run is I actually help people work with some increasingly dominant horses that are also experienced to be teachers. And you learn how to hold a certain body posture when the animal is trying to intimidate you, and how to breathe and connect with this animal in such a way that they gain confidence in you because of the fact that you're willing to stand up for yourself without becoming overly aggressive. And that's just something that doesn't make sense to a lot of people intellectually, but once you learn the body posture and the breathing that goes with this, it works like magic, not just with horses, but with people.
Very, very cool. That explains, I ran into a bobcat on the trail once, and he was hunting a deer, and I got between him or her and the meal. And I instinctively, I guess I've spent a lot of time in the trails, I stood my ground, I looked, I sent love, I lowered my eyes so I wasn't making direct contact, but I moved very slowly after standing there for a minute without turning tail and running. I did not get small or scurry away. I guess, stayed in my power so I didn't become that small little helpless morsel.
Yes, and you stayed in your power without also challenging.
No, that's why I kept my eyes down just a little bit.
Yeah. Here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand is that with somebody who's naturally dominant, you cannot shame them or talk them into submission. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times people will try to use shame on you, or you should be ashamed of that, or you hurt me. And what happens is if you try to shame someone who's naturally dominant, they'll actually become more aggressive. And so you have to learn how to be powerful, but in a way that you're not trying to use shame as a social control. A lot of people who are nurturer companions are very susceptible to somebody shaming them and causing them to back off and apologize. And they think that others should do the same thing. So they might try to, shame someone or say that you've hurt me, or I've been so good to you and helped you, and now how can you do this to me? Well, that doesn't work. It just makes the dominant more aggressive. So you actually have to learn how to hold your ground, but without shaming them or challenging them, and actually giving them immediate positive feedback when they start to head in the right direction, which is hard for many people to do. Once we feel like we're mad enough to set a boundary with somebody who's a dominant, then if they start to back off, a lot of people want to hold a grudge or have this person grovel. They don't actually give them the immediate positive feedback they need to give them to show that there's an advantage to listening to this. So I highly recommend reading that role called Dominance Without Malice in the 5 Roles of a Master Herder to get even a more just a better picture of how all of these pieces come together.
Thank you so much. On that note, we have a lot of people, I have a feeling, in the audience who have really big hearts, who are listening to the show, who would probably fit into, although it's across the spectrum, but probably fit into the nurturer companion. What can you tell us about the nurturer companion, and any tips for how we step in our own power, or stand in our own power rather than step in it?
Yeah. Stand in it is good. Yes, well, the nurturer companion role is the role that keeps the herd and the tribe together. It's the role that builds trust. It's the role that supports others. It's a role that helps them to feel like they are a part of a community. But if you overemphasize that role, it can become very toxic in a family or an organization, because among nurturer companions, a lot of times their power goes underground. So they can be masters of passive aggressive manipulation. They can try to, a lot of times what you'll see with a nurturer companion is that they'll be supportive and they'll extend themselves. And then if they're in the presence of somebody who's more of a dominant or a leader, that person may not be reciprocating. And it's not because they don't respect the nurturer. It's because they're not paying attention to nurturing and companion tools or skills in the same way that a really good nurturer companion is. So after a while, a nurturer companion will give them the silent treatment as a punishment, or start to ostracize them. Or, nurturer companions are really good at sitting down and drawing people out and helping them feel supported through their various vulnerabilities. But if you make a nurturer companion mad one too many times, what they're going to do is they're going to pull back, and they're going to secretly use your vulnerabilities against you behind your back, and cause the entire group, your effectiveness in the entire group to fall. And it's just an underhanded power play. It's incredibly destructive, but you can't take it any more personally than you can a dominant who attacks others for little or no reason. These are both instinctual things that happen when somebody's overemphasizing a role, and also not understanding how to use all of the roles in balance when and how to bring them all together. So I've met, especially in social service organizations and in schools, a lot of times among teachers, you find a lot of toxic nurturer companion behavior. And it's because they simply don't know when to bring in the mature use of the dominant role or the mature use of the leader role. They overemphasize the nurturing skills, and when they don't feel satisfied, they'll engage in covert power plays by not even admitting that they're interested in power. But power is simply the ability to influence a situation. And nurturer companions want to be able to influence others. And so learning which role to use to influence the group toward the greatest possible advantage for you as an individual, as well as everybody in the group, is part of the art form that comes from learning how to juggle all 5 of these skills.
Very cool. What can you tell us real briefly about sentinels and the importance of sleeping standing up?
Among horses are phenomenal at changing among them or rotating among them the sentinel role. And it comes because horses can't dream and process new information. They can't go into REM sleep unless they can lay down flat. And, in new situations or in situations out in nature where there's always predators roaming around, horses have to trade the sentinel role so that one horse will stand and kind of doze while the others can lay down and actually dream. And so that horse is performing a sentinel role. And in our culture, a lot of times we ignore the sentinel role, or we expect some professional to take care of that role for us, not recognizing that we all need to trade that role so that no one person gets exhausted with that level of responsibility. Yeah. A great example of somebody being forced to overemphasize the sentinel role and suffering as a result would be a single parent of teenagers. So that you have no parent to help you trade the sentinel role. So you're the one who's staying up at night worrying, is everybody actually in their bed? Is somebody climbed out of a window? What time is Susie coming home? Is John out too late? What are they doing? Where are they going? And so you find single parents having to be forced into that hyper vigilant sentinel position because nobody else is there to help them trade that role. They have sleep disorders. They have anxiety conditions. And so when we force one person to perform that role for us, we're doing them a disservice, but we're also doing ourselves a disservice by not recognizing that the sentinel role helps you to assess not just threats in the environment, but also opportunities in the environment that no one else may be paying attention to.
Thank you. Let's go from there to predators. And I mentioned before the show, we don't have time to go into it in much detail, but I grew up in a predatory family. And it made for some very interesting challenges, to say the least.
Well, almost all of us have a lot of experience with predatory environments because we've grown up in a predatory culture. A conquest culture is a predatory culture. And in predatory power systems, it's not actually accepted to actually kill the competition anymore, even though we talk in predatory metaphors, right?
Mm-hmm.
We talk about, wow, you really crushed that, or you really killed the competition there. But in general, non-lethal predatory behavior is when you seek out others' vulnerabilities to use against them for your personal gain. So by that definition, for the most part, the press is intensely predatory. The press is always looking out for the vulnerabilities of everyone they're covering, not just to help people course correct and to help society get back on track, but often to, destroy somebody's career to get better ratings. Our political system on both sides is intensely predatory. We're always looking for the vulnerabilities of the other side to use them against them for our personal gain. And so when you're in a predatory environment, it's really hard to trust anyone. It's really hard to tell somebody when you need a skill set or you're not confident or you need some support in doing something, because somebody might use that against you. And but the appropriate use of the predator role is just like the predator role in nature. It's to keep life in balance with the available resources. If we didn't have predators like lions and tigers, large herbivores would overpopulate and they would eat all the grass and they would die long, slow death from starvation. So if you're using the predator role compassionately in an empowered way, you're only using it to, let's say during a tough economic climate, to decide, well, maybe we need to make some cuts in our business in order for the business to thrive during this lean time. And, I recently had to use the predator role because I decided to do more traveling in Europe and Australia and across the US, and also to do more writing. So I had to cull some of my herd members at my own farm. I didn't kill them, but I found good homes for them. And so I used my inner lion to make the decision of which horses am I going to keep on my staff and then which horses am I going to find good homes for, because I'm the kind of person who could collect all possible stray animals of any kind and keep them till the end of time. So I had to engage my inner lion to make that decision. We can also use our inner predator to help us cull relationships that no longer serve us. We can also cull ideas and perceptions about ourselves that are no longer relevant as we start to grow into our own power. So the predator comes in and helps get rid of energy drains, resource drains. But if it's used in its mature, well-balanced form, it's always done with thoughtfulness and compassion. It's not done out of anger.
Thank you. I'm thinking back to my early years here, and this is kind of like a confession. When I was in sales in my early years, I was too competitive. I was a predator. When I first went to grad school, I had 2 different degree programs. In one program, I was the nurturer. In the other program, I felt compelled to be a predator. How can we tell if we're out of balance or if our kindness and compassion is not in order?
Well, I think that, you have to keep compassion in every role. So if you have to use the predator role, you have to step back and be thoughtful about it and decide what cuts to make, and also make those cuts in a compassionate way. If you're using the predator role in anger or as a knee-jerk reaction to somebody else hurting you, you're probably not using it well. One of the things I like to do is think of using all of the roles as part of what I call a crescendo. That means starting at a gentle level or a low level of power and gradually increasing the power. And so let's say I have an employee that's being disruptive or hurting others or not doing an important part of his job, I would start off with a nurturer companion role. I would have a conversation about support, finding out what's going on in their life and their work, and do they need any additional training, whatever. And then if that's not working, I would have a sentinel conversation. I would talk to this person very clearly about how his behavior is affecting the team and is affecting the larger organization's ability to get the job done and serve the mission and the clients. If that wasn't working, I would go to a leader-oriented conversation, which is, again, to focus on the future and the vision of where we're headed and make it clear that they really understand what that is and how they fit into it. And then also, what opportunities would they have in the future for promotion if they can get through the humps that they're stuck in right now? And then if that doesn't work, now the dominant's coming in. And the dominant is the one that starts to get a little stern and starts to create consequences for misbehavior. And so I would really be talking about, this is the kind of behavior I need to see now. This is the kind of behavior that needs to stop. I would be using that kind of divisive power. I would be kind of hurting the person and driving them forward in the productive direction. And I would also be setting consequences for misbehavior that were very clear. And the last thing the dominant does before the predator comes in is to tell the person that the predator is coming in next. And the predator comes in and says, okay, you've already been warned. You've been given these opportunities to excel in this organization. You've been given these consequences, and it's time for you to go. Clearly, you're not a match for this organization. And if you do that crescendo of using the roles, then when the predator does come in, the predator's not coming in with any anger, or you're not shaming the person. There's no malice. It's just, you already knew this meeting was coming. Here it is. Time for you to pack up and go. I wish you the best of luck in finding a good fit for you.
Thank you. From there, a few quick wrap-up questions. Most importantly, my wife, Jessica, she's the producer. She always wants me to ask a question for parents and their kids. What have you learned from this whole experience and from working with horses? There's so much, but what have you learned that can help parents with their kids today?
Parents, more than anyone, need access to all 5 roles. And they need to be able to help their children learn over time how to use all 5 roles. Like I mentioned earlier, you could be a phenomenal nurturer, companion, compassionate parent and have a naturally dominant child who's bullying kids at school, who immediately says no when you ask him to do anything, who's picking on their brother and sister. You're going to have to use the mature dominant role to step in and stop the unproductive behavior, but also model how to use that, how that child needs to learn how to use that role. If we shame a dominant child, if we tell them they're bad, if we reject them, if we ostracize them, we're not helping them become all that they can be. We're actually causing them to become increasingly frustrated. So one of the most dangerous combinations is a nurturer companion parent with a naturally dominant child, or an overly dominant, immature dominant parent with children who are more sensitive. It's another pretty lethal combination. And as parents need to learn how to use all the other forms of power, the leader, the dominant, the nurturer, and the sentinel, without bringing the predator in, so that we would never use our children's vulnerabilities against them. We would never reward brothers and sisters for using each other's vulnerabilities against them for personal gain. We would set up a family as a non-predatory power system, and the predator would only be there to keep life in balance.
Woohoo! I'm going to take off my coaching hat. I want to give it to you, Linda, for a minute. What one homework assignment do you want people to do when they leave here today to start to take action on what they're learning?
Well, I think that it would be helpful to read the 5 roles of a master herder, because I think you would get a much deeper understanding of, first of all, how this model rises out of nature and how nature really is different than we've been taught. How mutual aid is a really important part of that, but also how to really start to create a situation where we're comfortable with everyone becoming empowered, because we know that everybody can be empowered in a balanced way.
And so to thank you. So to find out more, to find your book, where you can also, I'm sure, take a quiz. It's in the book, but I'm sure you have it online to take a quiz to find out what you are as well. And to find a visualization on becoming a horse, where should people go?
Well, you can actually take up the Master Herder Professional Assessment online at masterherder.com. That's all one word. Master and then herder, HERDER.com. You can also go to my other website, eponaquest.com. That's E-P as in Paul, O-N as in Nick, A-Q-U-E-S-T.com. That has a variety of things on it. And if you want to do a visualization where I actually to music have a guided visualization where you become a horse and get a real feeling for what it's like to be such a powerful, sensitive animal, you can actually go to Become the Horse on bandcamp.com and you can download that visualization. And so you can actually look up my name on Bandcamp, Kohanov, Kohanov, at Bandcamp, and look for the Becoming the Horse visualization.
Fantastic. And we'll make sure to get all of those links on our website. So if you come on over to inspirenationshow.com, we'll get you over to masterherder.com, eponaquest.com, and Becoming the Horse on bandcamp.com as well. Few last quick wrap-up questions. First off, what personally brings you the greatest happiness, or what I call the woohoo factor?
Every day that I can, I like to let my horses loose onto the property and just spend time being with them as a herd member. And I get the biggest charge out of that. So while my horses are my colleagues in teaching people leadership skills and other things by doing, some really fun yet safe activities on the ground, for me, the big rush is at the end of the day is letting all the horses loose and walking among them and hanging out with them as a horse.
Woohoo! That would be so much fun. So any last words of wisdom you want to share with people today, Linda?
No, I just invite you to really learn from horses as teachers rather than as beasts of burden or vehicles for ego gratification, and really start to become an empowered yet non-predatory member of the human herd.
Awesome, awesome, awesome. Thank you so, so much, Linda.
Thank you, Michael.
So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get the 5 roles of a master herder, and let your horses loose today and shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so, so much, Linda.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!